What was the genesis of the project for you, James?
I had finished the previous film that I did. I had really didn't know what I was going to do, and my brother had found it sounds like a TV movie that I would have watched when I was a kid on Hallmark Hall of Fame. We found this big chest filled with photographs and paperwork from Ellis Island, and then we found out our name, which was Greiserstein, and all this stuff. And I thought, well, I don't know any of this. And I started to remember my grandfather and my grandmother. I got a little angry at myself because they spoke virtually no English. They spoke Yiddish to each other, even to the end. And my mother would say, go listen to your grandmother and your grandfather. Listen to their stories, please. And I didn't like them very much because I was a 13-year-old, 12-year-old, whatever, jerk, and I thought the Clash were cool, and I had a mohawk and all this crap. And I didn't want to hear about Russia. And what I do remember, though, and this is I don't get out very much, you'll notice in the course of this conversation, but one of the things I did notice was that it was quite the opposite of, I came to America, it was fantastic, I loved it, I made $1 billion. No, what happened was they were dislocated. It's all in the movie, by the way. My grandmother saw her parents get their heads chopped off by Cossacks. Not knowing how to eat the banana and looking at the spaghetti like it was bloody worms, and the monologue that Marion Cotillard has in the church, where she says that we were all together like animals on the ship, and all that was taken directly from my grandparents. And then I started, of course, asking my father all these questions, and the story started to build from there. And I took as much of the family history and put it into the film as I could. On my mother's side, her parents had a restaurant on the Lower East Side. It was called Hurwitz's. I'm going to give you one guess of the family name, by the way. No, it was Hurwitz, and so obviously, my great aunt died only about a year ago. She was 101 years old and quite lucid up until the end. And she talked about a guy named Max Hoxton, who was the local pimp who recruited women out of Ellis Island because you couldn't have solo women coming into the country. And so he would pick these women out and bring them in. And she described him as she said he was a loon. A loon, she basically said he was a mercurial guy and he, fake proper, like, yes, I'll be seated, and this kind of thing. But in fact, he was kind of a psychopath. And he used to go eat at Hurwitz's. So he would bring his women in and all that. And I thought, well, that sounds like a great part from Mr. Phoenix, who I like to torture. He was in agony the whole time. He said, everything I'm saying is a lie to her. I said, that's right. He said, why you do this to me? That's terrible.
One of the beautiful things about the film, I really think, is how it does not paint Bruno Weisso as a villain. In fact, it seems like, obviously he is the villain, but in order for Ava to have sympathy for him, to feel what she feels for him by the end of the film, he cannot be so black and white. It has to be a level. There has to be gradations there. You see him trying to survive. You see him trying to essentially make his own living in America as well. How much of a line did you, as a writer, want to cross there in kind of making him a little bit more gray?
I don't really have much use for a film where the characters are looked down upon as garbage by the filmmakers or the actor, frankly. When the actor, I sense that the actor is even playing a part and sort of condescending to the character. And in a sense, the movie is a lie in that small way, because in real life, he would have just, probably sold her out to the cops instantly. So, but I didn't want the film to be about that. I wanted the film to be about the opposite of that, which was the potential for redemption in a person, no matter how loathsome they may be. I read something, not to get too sententious, but I read a great quote once by the writer George Eliot, and she said, the purpose of art, if I use that dirty word, forgive me, is to extend our sympathies, which I thought was really beautiful. And I had been up late one night, Turner Classic Movies was playing La Strada, and I just found that the core of that film was intensely beautiful, because what Fellini found was that no matter how loathsome Zampano was, in the end you have to love him.
obviously speak about Joaquin. Do you guys? I mean, as we said, this is your fourth collaboration with him. Have things changed since your first ones? Yeah, I mean, it was what, 99 was the yards,
That's
right?
right. The first time we worked together, he had done really virtually nothing, nor had I, for that matter, which meant that I could sort of boss him around. The power dynamic has changed a lot,
Yeah.
which I don't really like. But he was back then I think he was like 4 years old or whatever, and he would be fantastic. And take 1, line reading 3 would be great, and then take 7, line reading 2 would be great, and then take 9. You'd have to piece it together. He was like lightning in a bottle. You could see that he had a brilliant capacity for acting, but there wasn't a craft yet. By the time I made Two Lovers, which was the film I made before this one, he was a completely different animal. And he had a method, not the method, but he had a method about how he would work, to the point where he would usually tell me to shut up. And I would say to him, I'd say, Joaquin, we'd do another take. I'd say, Joaquin, he'd go, I know, shut up. The other favorite thing that he likes to say is 8. So if I say to him, Joaquin, on that last take, he goes, 8. Now that, I didn't know what that meant for like 2 months. Then finally I asked him, I said, what do you tell me, 8? What does that mean? He means, it means I've been acting since I'm 8. You don't have to tell me.
I also love the feel for the 1920s Lower East Side performance world, the sort of sub vaudeville sensibility that to me seemed to evoke obviously not only that world, but also the very thin line between sort of performance and prostitution, and where that was, and also you can almost sort of see the beginnings, or maybe perhaps in the midst of it, the sort of the seedy underbelly of New York City life.
That theater is all based on a real theater called the Haymarket, which I had read about there's a great book, by the way, by a guy named Luc Sant, written in 1991 called Low Life, which describes all of this in rather fabulous detail. The guy is basically a genius. But there's this theater was, you're quite right, it was sub-vaudeville, and Joaquin and I really struggled with it, because in essence he has to give a kind of bad performance, like on purpose, because it was bad. The show was almost assuredly terrible, and by the way, considerably more racist than is portrayed in the movie. They would come out in blackface and do a whole thing, and we tried it. I never shot it because it was really offensive, and even though it was accurate, it totally took you out of the movie. And all of that stuff, though, the rest of it, which was, women of the world walking into the audience and sort of parading around, that was taken from all the stuff I read about the Haymarket, and that tradition was killed off pretty much by films.
You've made all of your films in New York, right? Is that?
I am guilty as charged. I love making films here. I think it's an amazing place, and people say to me, I was in London doing something, which was a commercial, and they said, making a movie here is much better. It's London, it's great. I'm like, no, it's much worse. And in New York, isn't it bad? Like, people are constantly walking through like the set and everything. I'm like, no, I just had to get in the car and drive like an hour and a half to come to Shepperton, where I ate the worst sandwich I ever ate in my life. New York, I'm on Arthur Avenue. If I don't like the crew lunch, I'm walking and having fresh mozzarella. It's fantastic. New York's great. What are you talking about?